Welcome to the second installment where we created an Apex Classic Report name column template. On our first installment, which you can watch the recording, they'll be posted on this video and on the blog post, we created this example where we have this to-do list with checkboxes for to-do that has been checked. And you can watch that first recording on my blog post. Here's a blog post, and here's the recording you can watch. Now, before we move forward, the very first thing that I noticed after I posted this first recording was a little interesting bug in which this checkboxes, there should have been square boxes when the checkbox is unchecked. And sure enough, we have a comment here from Ruby Findings, which exactly is asking that. Where do you see the FA square O? And yeah, sure enough, that is, honest to goodness, a bug. So why don't we just go through the troubleshooting of this bug? So if you remember, we were using our template. It contains this this phantasm FA checked square O, or if it's unchecked, it's just gonna say FA square O. Okay, so we want this checked to be either the word check or empty. If we examine our checkboxes, sure enough, we can see there is FA check. Now, if we examine the one below, we get to see that, well, look at that. There's an extra dash in there. And if I were to remove that extra dash, here I'm zooming in, if I were to remove that extra dash and tab out of there, we get to see it correctly. So why is that? How come I got an extra dash in there? Well, started looking at the report, and I'm looking at my SQL, and my SQL said, well, if it's completed, if they completed by is null, return a null value. So I'm like, what's going on? And then I realized that there's an interesting, useful feature on classic reports that say show null values as a dash. So sure enough, that extra dash is coming from our null value. We kind of did that to ourselves by setting the value to null. So I went ahead and removed that and saved it. We run it, and I totally expected the checkbox to be there, but guess what? It is still not there. So let's inspect. And we go to a phantasm, and look at that. Now we got a space, and if I get out of there, you can see here how I get an NBSP, the non-blocking space, the HTML version of a forced space. So we're gonna have to just add that dash ourselves. So what I figure we would do is go over here to our SQL and say, all right, I'm going to add our we're gonna place a dash ourselves to separate, and that means I'm gonna remove a dash from the initial. So this is gonna look kind of weird, but if I want it to be checked, I'm gonna add the word checked, and it needs to be separated by dashes. If it's null, I'm just gonna have a single dash. So I'm gonna save this, and now I also need to, let me save this, and now I just have extra dashes here, so it's still not gonna be correct, right? Now I've actually broken all of them, because if I go inspect this, guys, I'm gonna have extra dashes on those, the ones that are checked. But that's because what I think we should do is go to the template, and I go here to my appearance, I click on template, I'm gonna edit that, go to my share components, and now, that jumped too fast, there you go. I'm going to remove that dash. So if the value is null, I'm going to have a dash to separate the word FA from square. And if the value that I want is checked, I'm going to have my dash, checked, and dash. Apply changes. Remove this. Oops. Run. There you go. So now I can edit my values, and if I remove the completed by, apply changes, there, it disappears. Great. If I edit this, I say me, apply changes, and it appears. Great. All right, so that was the first thing I wanted to address, fixing that bug. The next thing we're going to do is, really the obvious thing we would want to do is, I want to click on those boxes, right, to check and uncheck. So how do we go about that? First thing I need to do is, well, the approach we're going to follow is that we're going to have a dynamic action. Then when you click on the checkbox, it's going to toggle the value. It's either going to set the checkbox or it's going to unset the checkbox. And if you recall, each of these to-dos is identified by a unique ID. If I edit this report, the classic report, the columns, the ID right now it's a link. Let's just temporarily make it, well, yeah, sure, why not? We're not going to edit from there anymore. Let's make it plain text, save. So each one of these is, of course, identified by a unique ID, right? Okay, we're going to add, first, we'll go to the column, and there's really no checked column here. What we have is the word checked. So what I would like to do now is change that font awesome approach to just be our check element. And to do that, we're going to place the whole font awesome checkbox in its own column so that we can check or uncheck as needed. So to do that, we're basically, I'm going to go here to Sublime. All right. So instead of now having the word checked or unchecked, I'm going to build the full font awesome link. And I'm going to grab this one. So now this would be check link or check, what don't we call it, check item. And instead of this word checked, I'm going to concatenate with the value from our decode. So now I have, if my completed by is null, and guess what? Now we're always going to have a value. So that bug we just fixed, it kind of goes away. So I can leave the dash here. I can actually return now a null. I'm not going to have that problem. And otherwise, I can add, I'm not going to need this first dash, and I am going to leave the second one. I don't need the word checked here, because now we're going to have a check item. So you can see here how this will build our whole HTML with the font awesome element. And we're going to have a check item. All right. So if I copy this and bring it to our report here and I save it, I just again broke the template because now I have a check item column which I'm not using, right? So I need to go and edit the template And instead of, I'm gonna go back to Sublime just because I like the clarity that it gives me. Instead of having something like this, I now have all of the Phantasm thing, or Phantasm HTML is gonna be check item. Okay, so now I have the to do and I have a check item. That's gonna be my new template. Apply changes. If I run this, you're gonna notice now that I'm gonna see the full HTML of the Phantasm here. That's because Apex is escaping this to avoid SQL injection problems, or better said, actually, is avoiding cross-site scripting problems, because this could potentially be JavaScript code that gets injected into our page. We don't have that situation here because our select statement really doesn't inject the input from the user. Completed by would be the input from the user, and all we're doing is, if there's no input, it's going to be empty. If there's input, we have the word checked. So we control all of this ourselves. So let me go back to a report. The way we handle that, some of you know that, you go here to the check item, and instead of it's actually now a new setting. It used to be in Apex 4.2, for example, you would say standard output instead of display. But now I think this is clear. Escape special characters. We're gonna say no. Don't escape special characters. By special characters, before I run this, by special characters, we're gonna have, this would be the open, the less than and the greater than on the HTML. Those would be special characters, because if you allow those, someone could inject JavaScript into your page. All right, let's refresh this because I saved it. There you go. So our report hasn't really changed in functionality. This is still exactly as it was before. If I clear this, I apply changes, it refreshes and it unchecks. Great. The reason I went through that trouble is because now I want this check item to be a link. I'm going to switch it to be a link. The link text is actually not going to a page. We're going to use a URL, and we're just going to say, let me show you something. If you just do a pound and I click OK, and now my text still needs to be the checked item. Okay, so far all we've done is enable a link. So now they look blue, now they're links, but if I click on them, you see this, we get this pound sign that shows up. If we had a lot of content in our page and we click on those, our page would jump, because whenever you have a pound here, it will try to jump to an ID of that name within the page. You've probably seen that behavior. You click on something with that tag and you jump all the way down to whatever that element is. So what I like to do is go to a £0, because 0 is not a valid ID. So what's going to happen is that pound that's trying to find an ID is not going to find anything, and it's not going to make our page jump. So I always like to do that target be a £0 so that we don't jump. All right, so far we have a link, but if we click on it, nothing really happens other than the URL changing. What we need to do is now have a dynamic action there. We're going to do a couple things for that. First, the link attribute is going to be very useful to us. I'm going to have the ID of the element. So I'm going to say data dash ID. And this data is very useful because you can add certain attributes to that link that the dynamic action can use. And for ID, we're actually going to use the ID column. I'm going to save, and the other thing we're going to do is a CSS class. We're going to call it chk item. This class I'm going to use within the dynamic action. I'm actually going to save it here to not forget it. I'm going to put it over here, chk item. That's going to be the class we're going to use for our dynamic action to find our checkboxes. So if I run this, how does this link look now? If I inspect this, because we made it a link, our font awesome is now wrapped in an anchor element. And that anchor element has a data with a ID equal to the ID of our element. ID 4, ID 1, 2, 3, whatever the value would be. And our font awesome still left alone, just with FA square, FA checked square. So far so good. Now we can create a dynamic action. So go to dynamic actions, and it's going to be a click dynamic action. We're going to create a dynamic action, and it's going to be, we're going to call it toggle check item. And it's going to be when we click, but when we click what? Now when we click, remember the name? chk item, and it's a class. So classes are a dot, and I paste the item. That's when I execute the click. When I click on any of those items. Now the event scope, very important, cannot be static. It needs to be dynamic. If we make it static, it's going to work the very first time that the report refreshes. Remember how this report refreshes whenever I edit something? And when it refreshes, that refresh, it would basically drop our dynamic action. It would be lost. Those new elements would not be active for our dynamic action unless we make it dynamic. If we make it dynamic, now that dynamic action is listening to anything new that shows up on the page, even after the refresh. That's a very important setting. And what we're going to do is we're going to execute some PL SQL code. I love this functionality. We simply set it to PL SQL code. On our PL SQL code, we're going to toggle the item. Now, before we're ready to write this PL SQL code, I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm just going to say no so that I can save it. We have to grab the ID that we're going to change. Okay? We're going to grab this data ID. We need to save it somewhere. To do that, I need to create an item on the page. A hidden item. I do a create page item, and I'm just going to call it ID, and it's going to be hidden. But very important, it cannot be protected, because even though it's hidden, our JavaScript in the page is going to be changing that value. If we leave it as protected, the browser will, Apex will think that somebody's maliciously injecting a value in the hidden item. That's what protected means in this case. Hidden items get protected by default because the expectation is that the user will not be changing those values. But in this case, the user will change the value by clicking on those checkboxes. They will be modifying that value. So I need to make it not protected. Great. So I have that item. I go back to my dynamic action. And we need a set value. We're going to set the value of what is the affected element. The item is P200 ID. That's where we're going to set the value. How are we getting that value? Well, in dynamic actions, we have this thing called I'm gonna write this. This would be the element we're working on, or the dynamic action itself. Triggering element. The triggering element is the element that triggered the click, right? That checkbox. That is going to be the triggering element. And that element happens to have a data set of the name ID. That's ID is what we chose after the data set, after the data name. So if I go back here, you see right here this data ID. If I had called this stuff, I would do dataset dot stuff. Whatever the name you choose, maybe you make it called, you give it the name of status, identifier, ID, whatever it is. That name is going to follow the keyword here, dataset. So this one single command, triggering element dataset ID, will grab that ID value and it will inject it into our P200 ID. I'm going to save this. At this point, if I go to my console and I do a $V of P200 ID, it's empty. And if I click on this guy, nothing really happens yet because we're not refreshing, we're not changing the value, but P200 ID should now have a value, and it doesn't. Why is that? Why is that? What did I do wrong here? Dataset ID. JavaScript substitutions is triggering element. Well, that's weird, right? Why? So this is what I love about this recordings. You get to watch me now troubleshoot something. Click CHK item. If I go here in my elements, it's this guy. Oh, guess what? We don't have that class. I should have had a class here called CHK item. So I think what's going on is that because we're using a whole column for our definition. Here, let me go back to the report. Column formatting. This guy is not being applied in. This is not a standard classic report column. So this is not being applied. So I'm actually going to add this guy over here. Class equal CHK item. Save it. Run it. If I inspect, well, it's already there. Now I have my class there. So now I have an ID of 4 because the value was saved. If I click, now it's 3. If I click on the first one, the value is 1. All right. Hope that was useful to see. All right. So I have that ID in an item. That item I can pass as part of that PL/SQL call to be able to toggle our element. So in our PL/SQL call, we need to submit the value of P200 ID along with that JavaScript code. And let's see if we can write in a single update statement. We're going to toggle this, right? So we're going to say update add to do. We're going to set the created by. No, sorry. It's not created by, it's completed by, right? How are we going to set it? Well, it depends on the value that it has. If completed by is set, I want to clear it because I'm toggling the values, right? And if it's not set, I want to set it. So I'm going to say if completed by is null, I need to set it, and I'm gonna set it as app user, the user that's logged in. Otherwise, I'm going to make it null. Now, which one am I gonna change? I'm going to change the ID that matches my P200 ID, the one that I'm submitting. The other thing I really want to do for security purposes is, remember this to-do table and this interface was for multi-users. So they can be, what if somebody were to manually enter ID number 5? This would work. Someone could toggle somebody else's checklist element. So I want to make sure that I'm really only changing those for the user that is logged in, the app user that is logged in. That will double check, that will enforce, and I need a semicolon because that's PL SQL code, right? So this will ensure that this update only runs for the things that I have rights to. It's going to change the one for the ID I'm looking at, and it's going to say my completed by is going to be, if it's null, I'm going to set it to app user. Otherwise, I'm going to make it null. Great. Finally, after we toggle something, we need to refresh the report so we can see our new change. So I go to region, to-do list, save it, run it. All right. Hopefully we'll see no errors here. If I go to network, we're going to see our Ajax go here. So let's check cookies. Yay, it sets. So here's our submission. If I look at the headers, let me make this bigger. We can see that we're submitting P200 ID as a 3. That's the ID we just checked. And really there's nothing else to see from this, because this is just going to be automatic to call this plugin call references our dynamic action. Apex handles everything for us doing this. And of course if we go to the console, there were no errors. And if I see my classic report, let me refresh the page. I should add the completed by here. Let's edit this. Report, classic report, completed by, completed on. Making a typo here, completed on. Save, run. So now I have different names here, but I checked cookies. I'm logged in as user demo, so that's the one that checks that. If I do toothpaste, it gets unchecked. If I refresh, toothpaste will be empty. So it seems to be working perfectly. Unchecked, check, uncheck, uncheck, uncheck. And if I click on the name, I get this interface, and I can still enter manually something and apply changes. Now, what else we want to do? Well, we have that completed on, right? So I just wanted to get this update working, but really we also want to do almost the same thing for completed on. So our completed on, so if our completed by is null, then we're gonna set it to sysstate. Otherwise it's null. So right now our completed on, it's really never been set. If I check toothpaste and refresh, I should have sysstate entered in there. Great. Okay, so at this point, we can probably stop here. The only other thing we could tackle is perhaps it would be nice to do a little bit more styling. I would like to add a delete icon, so it would be really nice to be able to delete to-dos just with a single click, also with a dynamic action. So that's going to be done almost the same as we did this toggle. It's slightly easier in that we get an ID and we simply delete it. Okay, but we'll add a prompt to make that decision. So let's see. Let's add, edit this. We're gonna add a new column, and it's also gonna be font awesome. You know what? In this case, let's see. It really doesn't matter what I put in this guy. I don't have to place my HTML here. I can put all of my HTML in my link. So in this case, why don't I just add the ID again, and I call it delete, or because reserve, I'm going to call it delete, D-E-L-C-H-K. Kind of cryptic, am I, with some of the names. All right, we save it. Remember, we have a custom layout, so it is not going to be displayed. If I run this, it's not visible. We actually have, that's one of the downsides, if you will, of this type of custom layout. But the techniques we're following here for the toggling and what we're going to do for the delete, they really apply exactly the same for a normal report. The only thing that's custom here is that we want to see it as a checkbox, list of checkboxes. I'm going to make this caps. Okay. All I had was a number, so it's actually not going to look that pretty. Yep, we just have the numbers. Let's go to Font Awesome again. Font Awesome. And we're going to search for, let's go to icons. I don't know if there's an actual delete. Yeah, a little trash can would be nice, right? So if a trash, which is an alias to delete for what I saw there. So let's just grab this and we go to the column, the delete check column, and we're going to make it a link, and that link is also going nowhere in the URL. And for link text is going to have our font awesome information. Okay, and for our data ID, we really could have reused our ID column like this, right? But in this case, I can do our DELCHK, which is the column I'm looking at, which is really the ID, right? It's exactly the same. And I'm going to add a class to this for the dynamic action. Delete CHK. Save it. Run it. Now we have garbage cans. They do nothing so far. We're going to create a new dynamic action. Is going to be called delete to do. When we click our delete, a dot, right? Because it's a class, dot delete chk. So when I click on the delete chk, what are we gonna do? Well, first thing, just like with the toggle, we're gonna set the value to the value from this triggering element dot data set dot id. And what are we setting? We're setting p200 id. We're reusing the same item, and that's perfectly okay, because when the delete is running, the toggle is not running. So first we're gonna do that. Now, because this is a delete, we probably want to have this check here that is the confirm. The confirm will ask, are you sure you want to delete? And if it's true, it's going to continue. So the way this confirm works is if the user clicks OK, it's going to go ahead and do the set value and then whatever else we have, which in our case will be now the PL/SQL code. We're going to submit our P200 ID, and our PL/SQL code is actually just a delete statement, delete from app to do, where owner, we're going to do again the owner, app user, and ID equal to P200 ID. So we make sure that we only delete things that we have rights to. And I think that's it. Is something else? We ask, we set the value, we delete it. Of course, now we need to refresh. So create a true action. And we refresh the report so that we see that the value is now gone. All right, let's get rid of cookies. Are you sure you want to delete? I click OK, and it disappears. We click on toothpaste. See how it doesn't work? What did I forget? If you recall, I talked about this with the other one. This event scope, static. When it's static, it worked the first time, the report refreshes, and all the code that was static on the page is no longer there. All those trash cans that were static the first time. So we need to set this to dynamic. Oops, there. Save it, run it. So I can delete toothpaste, I can delete orange juice, and I can add something new. Maybe I say, oh, I still want orange juice. OJ. Click create. And after I get it, I click my checkbox, click checkbox. And we're done. Great. So next thing we can do is add a little more styling. For example, I'm really not liking this bullet points here, but that's how lists look. I think this trash can should be a little bit grayed out. I think this checkboxes should be over here, all aligned. I think our to-dos should probably have a little bit more space between them. So there's quite a few ideas here that I have on styling. Why don't we do that our next video?